The night air hung heavy over Phoenix's downtown district as officers Mike Johnson and Lisa Carter patrolled the streets in their squad car. The clock on the dashboard read 11:42 p.m. when the call came through their radio, a potential altercation in an alley off Roosevelt Street. The dispatcher's voice crackled with static as she reported multiple suspects involved. Mike pulled the patrol car to the curb, and both officers immediately heard the commotion echoing from the narrow passage between two brick buildings. For young men, all wearing hoodies despite the Arizona heat, surrounded a middle-aged black man dressed in tattered business clothes. The victim pressed himself against the wall, clutching a worn backpack to his chest. "Hey, Phoenix PD." Mike's voice boomed through the alley as he and Lisa approached with flashlights drawn. The young men scattered immediately, their footsteps fading into the darkness. Standard procedure would have been to pursue, but something about the victim's demeanor made both officers pause. The man remained pressed against the wall, his eyes darting between the officers. Despite his disheveled appearance, the wrinkled suit pants, stained dress shirt, and unkempt beard, he carried himself with an unexpected dignity. His shoulders were squared, and his gaze, though wary, showed intelligence and assessment rather than fear. Mike took point on the approach, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. "Sir, are you all right? We'd like to help if we can." The man's response was immediate and defensive. "I don't need police assistance. I was handling the situation." The tension in his voice caught Lisa's attention. After 15 years on the force, she developed an ear for when people were hiding something significant. She noticed how the man's hands, though dirty, showed the kind of manicuring common among professionals. His shoes, while worn, were once expensive Italian leather. Lisa stepped forward, deliberately holstering her flashlight. "Those guys could come back. At least let us make sure you're safe." She maintained eye contact, noting how the man's posture shifted slightly, recognition, perhaps, of a genuine offer of help rather than threat. After a long moment, the man's shoulders slumped. "My name is David Clark," he said, his voice carrying the weight of resignation. "And yes, before you ask, that David Clark, the former federal prosecutor." The revelation hung in the air like smoke. Mike and Lisa exchanged glances. Everyone in law enforcement knew about David Clark's fall from grace 2 years ago. It had made national headlines when the respected federal prosecutor suddenly disappeared amid rumors of misconduct. Now here he was, homeless on the streets of Phoenix. Lisa maintained her calm demeanor, though her mind raced with questions. "Mr. Clark, would you be willing to tell us what happened tonight?" The question was simple, focused on the immediate situation rather than his past, giving him space to choose how much to reveal. David adjusted his grip on the backpack, which Lisa now noticed contained what appeared to be legal documents. "Those young men thought I was an easy target. They were wrong." He paused, studying both officers carefully before adding, "Though I appreciate your intervention. Sometimes the appearance of authority is more effective than actual resistance." The way he said authority carried an edge of bitterness that both officers caught. Whatever had led to his current situation clearly involved a deep distrust of law enforcement. Yet here he was, engaging with them, albeit reluctantly. The scene ended with an uneasy truce, David accepting their offer to at least drive him to a safer area, while Mike and Lisa processed the implications of finding such a prominent legal figure living on the streets. Neither officer could shake the feeling that this encounter would lead to something much bigger than a routine patrol call. In the relative safety of a 24-hour diner, David Clark sat across from Officers Johnson and Carter in a worn vinyl booth. The fluorescent lights highlighted the deep lines in his face and the patches of gray in his untrimmed beard. He wrapped his hands around a cup of black coffee, the first signs of his professional past showing through as he carefully arranged the sugar packets on the table. "I was investigating a series of unusual plea deals," David began, his voice barely above a whisper. Cases that should have been solid prosecutions were being dropped or pleaded down to minimal sentences. The pattern wasn't obvious at first, but after 6 months, I couldn't ignore it anymore. Mike leaned forward, careful to maintain a non-threatening posture. "What kind of cases are we talking about?" David's eyes darted to the window, scanning the empty parking lot before continuing. Drug trafficking, primarily, but not street-level deals. We're talking about major distribution networks. Someone was protecting them, and the trail led straight to... He stopped abruptly, his hands tightening around the coffee cup. Lisa recognized the fear in his expression. She'd seen it countless times in witnesses afraid to testify. "Mr. Clark, if someone threatened you..." "Threatened?" David let out a harsh laugh. "They didn't need to threaten me. They simply destroyed me. One day, I'm reviewing case files. The next, there's cocaine in my office desk, child pornography on my work computer, and offshore accounts in my name. The evidence was perfect. Too perfect. The implications hung heavy in the air." Mike felt his stomach tighten as he thought about the scale of corruption David was suggesting. Evidence tampering at this level would require coordination between multiple departments, possibly reaching into federal agencies. "Why Phoenix?" Lisa asked, noting how David's eyes constantly monitored the diner's entrance. "If you were based in Washington, Phoenix is where it started. The distribution network, the corrupt officials, all of it. I traced it back here before they caught on to my investigation. I thought..." He paused again, running a hand through his matted hair. "I thought if I could find the original evidence here, I could clear my name. But they knew I'd come." Mike started to ask another question, but David held up his hand. "That's all I can say. You seem like good officers, but I've learned the hard way that appearances can be deceiving. The less you know, the safer you'll be." The veteran prosecutor's words carried the weight of experience, but they also hinted at something larger: documentation or evidence he might still possess. The way he guarded his backpack suggested as much. As David prepared to leave, Lisa made one final attempt. "We can help protect you, Mr. Clark. There are channels we can use, people we trust." "No," David cut her off firmly. "Trust is what got me here in the first place. Thank you for the coffee, officers, and the intervention earlier. But this is where our paths diverge." They watched as David walked out of the diner, his silhouette disappearing into the night. Mike turned to Lisa, seeing his own concern reflected in her expression. Both knew they should let it go. Street patrol officers had no business investigating federal-level corruption. But the sight of a once-respected prosecutor reduced to homelessness, combined with the implications of his story, made that impossible. "What do you think?" Mike finally asked, breaking the tense silence. Lisa stared at the empty coffee cup David had left behind. "I think we just stumbled onto something much bigger than either of us realized. And I think he knows a lot more than he's telling us." The night shift was nearly over, but both officers knew their real work was just beginning. David Clark's partial confession had opened a door neither could walk away from, even as professional instinct warned them of the dangers ahead. Back at Phoenix Police Department's 7th Precinct, Mike and Lisa commandeered an empty interview room, spreading out what little information they had on David Clark across the scratched metal table. The morning shift was starting, bringing with it the usual bustle of officer changeovers and report filings. "Look at this," Lisa said, turning her laptop screen toward Mike. Before his disgrace, Clark had a 94% conviction rate on major drug trafficking cases. Then suddenly, in the span of 2 months, everything falls apart. She scrolled through newspaper archives, showing headlines that trace Clark's dramatic fall. The evidence against him was overwhelming, but Mike leaned closer, frowning at the screen. "But it's too clean. Like he said, too perfect." He pulled up his own department database access, typing quickly. "Let me cross-reference some of those dropped cases he mentioned with our local arrests." The door opened, and both officers quickly minimized their screens. Sergeant Peters stuck his head in. "You two planning to clock out anytime soon? Your shift ended an hour ago." "Just finishing some paperwork on a suspicious person report," Lisa answered smoothly. Peters nodded and left, but the interruption highlighted the delicate nature of their investigation. They were technically overstepping their jurisdiction. Once alone again, Mike pulled up a file that made him sit straighter. "Lisa, look at this. Remember Tom Williams? Your friend from the academy? The one who made detective last year?" "Yeah, his name keeps coming up in these case files. He was the arresting officer on 3 major drug busts that Clark was prosecuting, all of which got pleaded down to minimal sentences." Lisa watched her partner's face carefully. Tom Williams and Mike had been friends since childhood, growing up in the same Phoenix neighborhood. The implication that Tom might be involved in corruption clearly disturbed him. It could be coincidence, she offered, but her tone lacked conviction. Mike shook his head, continuing to type. There's more. In the 6 months before Clark's arrest, Tom's unit handled 15 major drug trafficking cases. All but 2 ended in plea deals or dismissed charges. The street value of the drugs involved. He turned the screen to show her. Over $50 million. The numbers told a story that neither officer wanted to read, but couldn't ignore. If David Clark had been investigating this pattern, it explained both his downfall and his current situation. We need to be careful here, Lisa said, lowering her voice despite the empty room. If what Clark suggested is true, we're dealing with corruption that reaches into federal agencies. One wrong move could get us killed, Mike finished grimly. Or worse, framed like Clark. They spent the next hour creating a secure folder of evidence, careful to store it on an encrypted drive rather than department servers. The pattern they uncovered was disturbing, a systematic dismantling of major drug trafficking cases, always following the same template. Perfect arrests followed by inexplicable plea deals or case dismissals. Mike, Lisa said suddenly, pointing to a detail in one report. These cases all shared the same prosecutor after Clark was removed, James Morrison. And look who signed off on Clark's arrest warrant. Mike felt his stomach drop. Morrison, the same guy who's now running for state attorney general. The implications were staggering. If their suspicions were correct, they weren't just dealing with corrupt cops. They were facing a sophisticated network that reached into the highest levels of law enforcement and politics. As they gathered their things to finally head home, both officers knew they had crossed a point of no return. The question wasn't whether to pursue the investigation, but how to do it without ending up like David Clark. Or worse. We need to find Clark again, Mike said as they walked to their cars. He's the key to all of this. Lisa nodded, but added, and Mike? About Tom. I know. He cut her off, his jaw tight. If he's involved, he goes down with the rest. Badge or no badge. Friend or no friend. The morning sun was bright over Phoenix, but both officers felt the shadow of what they'd discovered following them home. They had started pulling at a thread that could unravel everything they believed about their department, their colleagues, and their city. 3 days after their initial discovery, Mike and Lisa received an anonymous text message with coordinates and a time. The location, an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Phoenix. Against all protocols and common sense, they decided to attend, wearing plain clothes and carrying backup weapons. The warehouse's interior was dimly lit, but they could make out voices coming from a makeshift office space on the second floor. Using their tactical training, they positioned themselves behind shipping containers, close enough to hear, but hidden from view. The Clark situation needs to be handled. A voice they recognized as James Morrison's echoed through the space. He's been spotted around the city again. Our friends in the department say 2 patrol officers tried to help him. Mike and Lisa exchanged glances in the darkness. They hadn't reported their encounter with Clark. Someone had been watching them. Those officers, another voice joined in, Tom Williams. Johnson and Carter. I know Mike. He's not going to let this go if he thinks something's wrong. We might need to take care of them too. The casual way Tom discussed taking care of fellow officers made Mike's blood run cold. Lisa placed a steadying hand on his arm, reminding him to maintain their cover. 8 more figures entered the office space, their shadows visible through the frosted glass. The meeting proceeded with military precision, each person reporting on different aspects of their operation. The next shipment comes in Tuesday, one voice reported. We've got our usual people at the Port Authority ready to clear it. What about the FBI inquiry? Someone asked. Morrison's laugh carried clearly. Already handled. Their lead agent is now driving a very nice new car, and his kid just got accepted to Stanford. Amazing how these things work out. The systematic dismantling of law enforcement became clear as the meeting continued. They had people everywhere, customs, local police, federal agencies, even the courts. The corruption wasn't just widespread, it was institutionalized. Then a new figure entered, causing everyone to fall silent. Through the glass, Mike and Lisa could see only a silhouette, but the person's authority was evident in how others deferred to them. "I have information," the newcomer spoke softly, requiring everyone to lean in. "Documents that could expose everything. Someone in this room has been careless, leaving trails that others might follow." The tension in the room became palpable. The informant continued, "I'm willing to handle this for a price. But understand, if anything happens to me, everything goes public. I've arranged it with multiple sources." Morrison's voice turned sharp. "How do we know you have anything worthwhile?" The informant pulled out a tablet, showing something that made several people curse. "This is just a sample. I have names, dates, bank transfers, everything. The question is, what's it worth to you?" Mike and Lisa had heard enough. They needed to identify this informant. Someone with concrete evidence could break the entire case open. But as they began their careful retreat, Lisa's phone vibrated. Despite being on silent, the sound seemed to echo in the quiet warehouse. Footsteps immediately headed toward the stairs. "Check the lower level," Tom's voice commanded. "Now!" The partners split up, using their knowledge of tactical movement to escape through different exits. Outside, they regrouped 2 blocks away, hearts pounding. "We need to find that informant," Lisa said, still catching her breath. "They're the key to everything." Mike nodded, but his expression was grim. "Did you see how many people were in that room?" "At least 3 were wearing captain's bars. And Tom," he trailed off, the betrayal evident in his voice. As they drove away, Lisa's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from an unknown number. Midnight. "Tomorrow, St. Anthony's Church. Come alone or don't come at all." The message deleted itself after 10 seconds, leaving them with a critical decision. The informant was reaching out, but it could also be a trap. Either way, they were now too deep to turn back. "What do you think?" Lisa asked, though she already knew the answer. Mike's response was immediate. "We go, but we go smart. And we go armed." The sun was setting over Phoenix, casting long shadows across the city. Somewhere in those shadows, David Clark was hiding, perhaps with his own set of evidence. And now, there was an informant willing to talk. The pieces were there, if they could stay alive long enough to put them together. St. Anthony's Church stood dark against the Phoenix skyline, its Gothic architecture creating deep shadows perfect for concealment. Mike and Lisa arrived separately, having spent the day setting up emergency protocols and dead man switches. If anything happened to either of them, evidence would automatically be sent to multiple news outlets. At exactly midnight, a figure emerged from the church's side door. Even in the darkness, they recognized the informant from the warehouse meeting. Up close, he was younger than expected, early 30s, wearing an expensive suit that seemed at odds with his nervous demeanor. "Agent Marcus Chun, Internal Affairs," he said quietly, showing his badge. "Though that affiliation isn't worth much anymore. They got to most of my department 6 months ago." Lisa kept her hand near her concealed weapon. "Prove you're not part of their operation." Chun pulled out a thumb drive. "This contains the first part of my evidence. Enough to show I'm serious, not enough to get anyone killed if you're compromised. It includes financial records showing payments to Tom Williams and others from shell companies linked to the cartel." Mike's jaw tightened at the mention of Tom, but he remained professional. "Why come to us?" "Because you're the only ones who've shown interest in Clark's situation without being immediately shut down or bought off." Chin glanced around nervously. "They're watching me. I've been for weeks. I needed to find clean cops, and you 2 set off no red flags in my background checks." A car passed slowly down the street, causing all 3 to tense. After it passed, Chin continued rapidly. "There's a USB drive in Clark's possession. Contains everything. Names, dates, offshore accounts, video evidence. It's why they haven't killed him yet. They don't know where he's hidden it." "Why didn't he go public?" Lisa asked. "Same reason I haven't. Dead man switches only work if they believe you're valuable alive. The moment they think you're about to talk." Chin made a slashing motion across his throat. "Clark's smart. As long as they think he might have evidence hidden somewhere, they won't risk killing him." Suddenly, Chin's phone buzzed. His face went pale as he read the message. "They know. Someone must have seen." He thrust a piece of paper into Lisa's hand. This is where you can reach me. But don't use phones or email. They're monitoring everything. Before they could respond, Chin disappeared into the shadows of the church. Moments later, Lisa's phone received an anonymous message. Officer Carter, your sister in Denver might want to be careful crossing streets. Accidents happen. The threat was clear. They had her family under surveillance. Mike checked his own phone to find a similar message. Asked Tom about July 15th, 1999. Some friends have interesting photos from that night. They're trying to spook us, Lisa said, though her voice betrayed her concern for her sister. No, Mike responded, his face ashen. July 15th, 1999. That's the night Tom and I... He stopped, looking sick. They have something on everyone. Something they can use. They spent the next hour setting up countermeasures, warning family members to be careful, establishing code words for emergencies, creating new secure communication channels. But both knew these were just band-aids on a bullet wound. We need to find Clark, Lisa finally said. Chin's intel suggests he's the key to everything. The USB drive could be anywhere, Mike finished, or might not exist at all. But it's our best lead. As they prepared to leave, one final message came through. This time from a different unknown number. You've chosen your side. Remember, accidents don't just happen to family members. They happen to partners too. The threat hung between them like a physical presence. They'd both worked cases involving corrupt cops before, but this was different. This was systematic, organized, and reached into every level of law enforcement. Last chance to walk away, Mike offered, though he knew what her answer would be. Lisa's response was to pull out Chin's note and begin memorizing the contact information. They threatened my sister, she said simply. This just got personal. Dawn was breaking over Phoenix as they left the church, each heading in different directions as a precaution. They had evidence now, thanks to Chun, but they also had targets on their backs. The race was on to find Clark and his USB drive before the corrupt network could silence them all. The next 48 hours moved at a frenzied pace. Mike and Lisa separately tracked David Clark's movements through homeless shelters and soup kitchens, while carefully avoiding their usual patrol routes to stay under the radar. But the corrupt network was moving faster. During an emergency meeting in a busy mall food court, chosen for its crowd cover, Chin arrived looking haggard. They've called an emergency meeting tonight. Someone suggested making an example of a troublesome element. His hands shook as he stirred his untouched coffee. They're going to move on Clark. Where? Mike demanded, keeping his voice low despite the ambient noise. Warehouse District, Building 237. They're bringing in specialists, guys they use when they need something to look like an accident or suicide. Chun checked his watch compulsively. Meeting's at 11. They'll move on Clark right after. Lisa leaned forward. How did they find him? They didn't. They're setting a trap. There's word on the street about a legal aid center willing to help him clear his name. Clark's desperate enough to show up. Mike cursed under his breath. It was the perfect bait for a former prosecutor seeking redemption. We need to get to him first. Already tried, Chin admitted. He's gone completely underground since they started spreading the legal aid rumor. But he hesitated, glancing around before continuing. I managed to get the warehouse security codes. If you're planning something stupid, at least you'll have access. A family with noisy children settled at the next table, temporarily pausing their conversation. When they could talk again, Lisa laid out the harsh reality. If we warn Clark, we expose ourselves. If we don't, he dies. Worse, Chin added. If he dies, any evidence he has dies with him. And then there's nothing stopping them from coming after us next. The choice was clear, even if the path forward wasn't. They spent the next hour planning a dangerous intervention. The warehouse's layout, guard rotations, and security camera positions were memorized. Chin's access codes would get them in, but after that, they'd be on their own. At 10:30 p.m., Mike and Lisa positioned themselves near Building 237, wearing dark clothing and carrying only their backup weapons. Their service weapons could be too easily traced. They watched as expensive SUVs with tinted windows began arriving, their occupants disappearing inside. Tom's here, Mike said flatly, recognizing his former friend's vehicle. The betrayal in his voice had hardened to determination. At 10:45, they spotted Clark approaching, looking even more disheveled than before. He moved cautiously, but his desperation was evident in his willingness to approach such an obvious trap. "Now or never," Lisa whispered. They moved quickly, using the shadows of shipping containers for cover. Chen's codes worked, giving them access through a side entrance. Inside, they could hear voices from the main floor. The corrupt officers were already discussing their plans for Clark. Lisa spotted him first. Clark had entered through the front, drawn by signs advertising free legal assistance. He froze when he saw the group waiting for him, finally understanding the trap. What happened next was chaos. Mike fired 2 shots into the air, creating a diversion. Lisa used the confusion to grab Clark, pulling him toward their exit route. But the corrupt officers recovered quickly, years of training kicking in. Gunfire erupted, bullets pinging off metal containers. They heard Tom's voice shouting orders, organizing a search pattern. Clark, proving more resilient than expected, kept pace as they ran. "The evidence," Lisa gasped as they ran. "Chen said you have a USB drive." "Safe," Clark managed between breaths. "But they'll never find it." They made it to the exit, but their escape route was cut off. 2 SUVs had been moved to block the alley. Behind them, footsteps approached from multiple directions. "Other exit," Mike commanded, leading them deeper into the warehouse complex. They could hear their pursuers coordinating over radio, trying to box them in. Lisa's phone buzzed, a message from Chun, 3rd floor, west window. Fire escape removed, but landing pad below. Only chance. They ran upstairs, pursuers close behind. The window Chun mentioned was visible, but the drop looked impossible. Then they heard Tom's voice, closer now. "Mike, think about what you're doing. We can work something out." Mike's response was to shoot out the window, creating their exit. "Ladies first," he said grimly. Lisa looked at the drop, then at Clark. "Evidence better be worth it," she muttered, then jumped. Clark followed. Mike provided covering fire before leaping himself. They landed hard on old cardboard and pallets, but nothing broke. As they ran into the night, they could hear sirens approaching. Whether friend or foe, they couldn't risk finding out. "Safe house," Lisa gasped. Chen's got one ready. They had saved Clark, but now they were fully exposed. The next move would have to be decisive. The corrupt network wouldn't give them another chance. The safe house was a small apartment above a Chinese restaurant in South Phoenix. The smell of cooking oil permeated everything, but it offered anonymity. Mike stood at the window, watching the street while Lisa tended to a cut on Clark's arm from their escape. "They'll check every property Chen owns," Clark said, wincing as Lisa applied antiseptic. "That's why this one's registered to his deceased grandmother," Lisa replied. "He's been preparing for this day for months." Mike's phone rang, Tom's number. After 3 days of silence between them, this call was inevitable. He put it on speaker. "You've got 1 hour, Mike." Tom's voice was cold, professional. "Bring Clark to the old basketball court where we used to play. Just you and him. We can end this quietly. Like you ended those trafficking cases quietly?" Mike's voice shook with barely controlled anger. "How long, Tom? How long have you been dirty?" A pause. "You don't understand. The system was broken before we ever put on the badge. We just found a way to make it work for us." Another pause. "Remember July 99? The night we swore we'd never talk about? I covered for you then. Brothers, remember?" Mike's face hardened. "That night, I crashed my dad's car, and you helped me hide it. That's what you're comparing to protecting drug traffickers. It's all the same game, Mike. Different stakes. 1 hour. Or next time, we won't miss your partner." The call ended. Mike slammed his fist against the wall, making both Lisa and Clark jump. "He's right about one thing," Lisa said quietly. "The system is broken. But that doesn't justify what they've done." Clark looked up from his bandaged arm. "I thought I could change it from within. Prosecute the right cases, build something better. Instead, I discovered that the corruption goes deeper than anyone realizes. It's not just about drugs or money anymore. They're building power. Political power." Mike turned from the window. "The evidence you have. What exactly does it show?" "Everything. Video recordings of meetings with cartel leaders. Bank transfers. Names of judges, politicians, federal agents. Morrison isn't just running for state attorney general. He's being groomed for a federal position. The cartels are buying themselves a government, piece by piece. Lisa's phone buzzed, a text from her sister. Someone just tried to break into my apartment. Police came, but said it was probably just kids. The warning was clear. Time was running out. We can't keep running, Mike said finally. They'll just keep coming after everyone we care about. Clark pulled his ragged backpack closer. The USB drive isn't the only copy. I've got everything uploaded to secure servers, set to release if anything happens to me. But that's the problem. They know that. As long as I'm alive, they can't risk the information getting out. That's why they want to talk. They need to know where all the copies are before they kill me. Mike made a decision. I'm going to meet Tom. Mike, no, Lisa started, but he cut her off. Not to surrender, to end this. He'll be expecting me to come quietly, try to negotiate. He won't be expecting me to be wired, recording everything he says. He turned to Clark. You said you have multiple copies of the evidence? Time to use them. Understanding dawned on Lisa's face. A trap within their trap. They spent the next 30 minutes preparing. Chin arrived with recording equipment and bulletproof vests. The plan was dangerous, banking on Tom's arrogance and his belief that his old friend would try to protect him. As Mike prepared to leave, Lisa grabbed his arm. This isn't just about corrupt cops anymore. If Clark's right about Morrison's political ambitions, then we're fighting something much bigger than we realized, Mike finished. But we have to start somewhere. And Tom, he paused, emotion finally cracking through his professional facade. Tom needs to answer for what he's done. Clark handed Mike a small USB drive. This one's clean, no sensitive data. Let them find it on you. Make them think it's the only copy. As Mike headed out into the night, Lisa's voice stopped him one final time. Remember your training. And remember who you really are. Not what Tom thinks you are. The old basketball court waited, a chain-link fortress of childhood memories now tainted by betrayal. Mike walked toward it, knowing that either way, this night would end with the truth finally exposed, even if it cost him everything. Mike approached the basketball court where he and Tom had spent countless hours of their youth. Now it was surrounded by unmarked vehicles, their darkened windows concealing watchful eyes. Tom stood alone in the center court, but Mike's trained eye caught the glint of rifle scopes from nearby rooftops. You came alone, Tom said, not a question, but a statement. Always the honorable one. Like you used to be, Mike replied, keeping his hands visible. The wire under his shirt felt like it was burning against his skin. Tom smiled without warmth. You still don't get it. Morrison's going all the way to Washington. Think about the bigger picture. We're not just talking about local drug trafficking anymore. We're talking about controlling policy, international trade, immigration enforcement, real power. And how many people have to die for this real power? Sometimes you have to break things to fix them. Tom stepped closer. The USB drive, where is it? Mike slowly reached into his jacket, producing Clark's decoy drive. Everything Clark had. His insurance policy. As Tom reached for it, a new voice cut through the night. Don't give it to him. James Morrison emerged from one of the SUVs, flanked by two men in expensive suits. Officer Johnson, you're even more naive than your friend here. Mike's wire picked up everything as Morrison continued. Tom thinks this is about drugs and politics. It's so much bigger. We're restructuring the entire justice system. Every judge we buy, every prosecutor we control, every cop we turn. It's about creating a new order. A corrupt order, Mike said, letting his disgust show. Morrison laughed. Corruption implies disorder. What we're building is systematic, organized, perfect. He nodded to one of his men, who produced a laptop. Let's see what's on that drive, shall we? The moment they plugged it in, Lisa's voice crackled through everyone's earpieces. Those are the corrupt officers as well as Mike's. Federal agents, move in. All units go. Chaos erupted. The snipers on the rooftops weren't Tom's men. They were FBI agents Chun had coordinated with. The unmarked vehicles surrounding the court weren't all belonging to Morrison's group. Half were federal tactical units. Morrison's face contorted with rage. You stupid dash, he reached for a weapon, but Mike was faster, tackling him as gunfire erupted around them. Tom stood frozen for a moment, betrayal, and realization washing over his face before he turned to run. He made it 3 steps before Lisa emerged from the shadows, her weapon trained on him. "Don't," was all she said. The raid was over in minutes. As Morrison was led away in handcuffs, he called back to Mike. "You think this ends with us? The system is already in place. Cut off one head dash. Save it for your testimony." Lisa interrupted, watching as more corrupt officers were brought out of the surrounding buildings. Chin appeared, looking both exhausted and relieved. "We got the main players, but Morrison's right about one thing. This goes deeper than Phoenix. We've uncovered links to similar operations in Chicago, Miami, and Los Angeles." Mike watched as Tom was led to a transport vehicle. Their eyes met briefly, decades of friendship ending in a moment of silent acknowledgement. "What about Clark?" Mike asked. "Safe," Lisa responded. "He's already speaking with federal prosecutors.